Case 1. Krista Gale Pike, January 12, 1995, Knox County, Tennessee. In the winter of 1995, inside a federal jobs program meant to give struggling teenagers a second chance, a friendship curdled into something the city of Knoxville would never forget. Krista Gale Pike was 18 years old, enrolled at the Knoxville Job Corps Center, a program designed for young people who needed structure, training, and a path forward. By most accounts, Pike had already lived through more hardship than most adults twice her age. A chaotic childhood marked by instability and neglect that left lasting scars. At Job Corps, she found something that felt, for the first time, like belonging. She fell into an intense relationship with a fellow student, 17-year-old Darrell Shipp. That sense of belonging curdled into obsession. Pike became consumed with jealousy toward another student at the center, 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer, convinced that Slemmer was trying to take Shipp away from her. Investigators would later say that what began as teenage jealousy escalated, over days, into a plan. On the night of January 12, 1995, Pike, Shipp, and a third acquaintance, 18-year-old Shadola Peterson, invited Slemmer to walk with them to an abandoned steam plant on the University of Tennessee campus, under the pretense of smoothing things over. It was isolated, it was dark, and it was there that Colleen Slemmer's life came to an end. For more than half an hour, Slemmer was subjected to severe and sustained harm at the hands of Pike and Shipp, while Peterson stood watch nearby. Investigators later documented disturbing evidence that the attack had ritualistic overtones, tied to Pike and Shipp's fascination with occult imagery. Slemmer did not survive the attack. In one of the case's most chilling details, Pike kept a physical token from the scene, later showing it to other students back at the Job Corps dormitory, a decision that would ultimately lead investigators straight to her. Word spread fast among the students. Within days, tips reached local police, and Pike, Shipp, and Peterson were taken into custody. The case shocked Knoxville not only for its brutality but for the age of the person accused of orchestrating it. At trial in 1996, prosecutors built a case around premeditation, the group luring Slemmer to an isolated location under false pretenses. The defense attempted to introduce evidence of Pike's traumatic upbringing, arguing it should weigh heavily in sentencing, but the presentation was limited. The jury deliberated only a few hours before returning a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder and conspiracy. Pike was sentenced to death on March 30, 1996, making her at the time one of the youngest women in the modern history of the United States to receive that sentence. Her co-defendants faced very different outcomes. Because Shipp was 17 at the time of the crime, the law barred a death sentence for him. He received a life term instead. Peterson, who cooperated with investigators, was given probation. For nearly 3 decades, Krista Pike has remained on death row at the Deborah K. Johnson Rehabilitation Center in Nashville, for most of that time the only woman in the state living under a death sentence, held for years in a form of isolation her attorneys have since challenged in court. Her legal team has spent years arguing that her age at the time of the crime, combined with undiagnosed mental illness and a documented history of childhood trauma, should have changed her sentence. Tennessee courts have repeatedly declined to reopen the case. In the fall of 2025, the Tennessee Supreme Court set an execution date, September 30, 2026. If it proceeds, it would mark the first time in more than 200 years that Tennessee has executed a woman. As of this recording, appeals and clemency requests remain active, and human rights organizations have publicly petitioned the governor for mercy, citing her age at the time of the offense and her documented psychiatric history. Whatever the outcome of those final appeals, one fact has never been in dispute. Colleen Slemmer was 19 years old, working to build a better future for herself through the same program that was supposed to help everyone involved. Her family has spent 30 years living with a loss that no verdict can undo. Cases like this one are a reminder of why advocacy for crime victims and their families matters long after a trial ends. Organizations such as the National Center for Victims of Crime continue to support families navigating exactly this kind of prolonged, decades-long search for closure. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 2. Gail Owens, February 19, 1985, Shelby County, Tennessee. From the outside, Gail and Ronald Owens looked like the picture of a stable, church-going Memphis family. 2 young sons, a tidy suburban home, all the outward markers of an ordinary life. What went on behind their closed doors told a very different story. Gail Owens would later say she endured years of severe emotional, physical and sexual abuse inside her own marriage. Terrified of the stigma a divorce would bring in her community, and desperate to shield her children from ever learning the details of what she says she survived, she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She sought out someone to end the marriage permanently and found Sidney Porterfield, a man she paid $10,000 to carry out the act. On February 19, 1985, Porterfield entered the Owens home and attacked Ronald Owens, who did not survive. Police investigated quickly, and both Gail Owens and Porterfield were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. What followed was one of the most quietly devastating legal sequences in Tennessee court history. Before trial, prosecutors offered Owens a plea deal, plead guilty and avoid the death penalty entirely in favor of a life sentence. She accepted. But because her co-defendant refused a matching deal, prosecutors withdrew the offer and pushed both defendants to trial together. Here is where the case takes its most painful turn. To spare her 2 young sons from ever hearing, in open court, the details of the abuse she says she lived through, Gail Owens chose not to testify in her own defense. As a result, the jury that decided her fate never heard a single word about the abuse allegations that to this day form the emotional core of her case. In 1986, both Owens and Porterfield were convicted and sentenced to death. Owens spent more than 2 decades on death row. Over those years, she became a fixture of prison ministry programs, and her case slowly drew the attention of legal advocates and reform organizations who argued that her sentence was wildly out of proportion with how Tennessee courts had handled comparable domestic homicide cases, especially given that the jury never weighed her account of the marriage. In July of 2010, with her execution date only months away, then-Governor Phil Bredesen commuted her sentence to life in prison. Because of how Tennessee sentencing law worked at the time of her original conviction, a life sentence carried a mandatory service period that could be reduced through good behavior. Gail Owens walked out of custody in October of 2011, 26 years after the crime that took her husband's life, and reunited with the sons she had spent decades trying to protect. There is no version of this case that erases what happened to Ronald Owens, and his family carried their own devastating loss through every stage of these proceedings. But the case also became a landmark in how Tennessee, and the country more broadly, began to reckon with how courts handle claims of domestic abuse when a victim of that abuse becomes a defendant. If anything in this case resonates with you or someone you know, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available at any hour for confidential support, because the pattern at the center of this story is, tragically, still playing out in homes across the country today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 3. Mary Winkler, March 22, 2006, McNairy County, Tennessee. In the small, close-knit town of Selma, Tennessee, the 4th Street Church of Christ was the center of community life, and its young pulpit minister, Matthew Winkler, was seen as its warm, charismatic heart. His wife, Mary, and their 3 young daughters were, to the congregation, the model of a happy family. What was happening privately inside their home would soon shatter that image entirely. On the evening of March 22, 2006, church members grew concerned when Matthew failed to appear for a scheduled midweek service. Deeply out of character for a man so devoted to his congregation, a group went to check on the family at the church-owned parsonage. Inside, they made a devastating discovery. Matthew Winkler had not survived a shotgun wound to his back. His wife and their 3 little girls were gone, along with the family's minivan. An Amber Alert went out across state lines. The next day, law enforcement located Mary Winkler and her daughters hundreds of miles away in Orange Beach, Alabama. She was taken into custody without incident and quickly told investigators that the shooting had happened during an argument, one she described as an accident. The trial that followed, in April of 2007, became a national media event. Prosecutors argued financial desperation was the driving force, presenting evidence that Mary had unknowingly fallen victim to an online financial scam, opening a string of bad bank accounts and losing thousands of dollars the family could not afford to lose. The state's theory was that she feared her husband's reaction once the losses came to light. The defense told a very different story, one of a hidden, controlling home life. On the stand, Mary testified that behind closed doors, Matthew was domineering and emotionally and physically harmful toward her, describing years of demands she found humiliating and frightening. She testified that on the morning of the shooting, after a threat from her husband, she picked up his shotgun intending only to force him to listen to her, and that the weapon discharged before she meant it to. The jury weighed both narratives and ultimately rejected a first-degree murder conviction, instead finding Mary Winkler guilty of the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter, a verdict reflecting the belief that she acted in a state of intense emotional distress rather than with premeditation. She was sentenced to a 3-year term, but under the terms handed down by the court, she ultimately served only 67 days in a secure mental health facility before her release on probation in August of 2007. The verdict divided the country. Supporters of the outcome pointed to the testimony about her home life as clear mitigating context a jury was entitled to weigh. Critics argued the sentence was far too lenient, given that a husband and father had lost his life. What both sides agreed on was that the case forced an uncomfortable, necessary conversation about how allegations of hidden abuse inside a marriage, even one that looks perfect from a pew, can complicate the pursuit of justice for everyone touched by it, including the 3 daughters who lost their father that night, and in every practical sense, much of their mother too. Families navigating the aftermath of domestic violence and its long shadow on children can find confidential guidance through the National Domestic Violence Hotline, a resource that exists precisely because so many of these situations remain invisible until it's too late. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed, so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 4. Tiffany Wright, August 13th, 2022, Shelby County, Tennessee Drive. Yvonne Nelson spent decades building a legacy in Memphis. As the leader of the community organization, My Zip, she was a tireless advocate against urban blight, illegal dumping, and environmental neglect in the Whitehaven neighborhood, earning statewide recognition for work that improved the daily lives of people who had long felt overlooked. At 60 years old, she was, by every account, a pillar of her community. Nothing about her decades of public service could have predicted how her life would end. On August 13th, 2022, Dr. Nelson met with 33-year-old Tiffany Wright in a shopping center parking lot along Yale Road in the Raleigh neighborhood of Memphis. According to investigators, the meeting was meant to resolve a financial disagreement, a dispute over a mobile payment transfer of just $200. What should have been a minor disagreement escalated with shocking speed. Wright drew a handgun and fired multiple times, and Dr. Nelson did not survive. Nearby business owners called emergency services after hearing gunfire, but by the time officers arrived, it was already too late. Wright had fled the scene. The investigation that followed drew in federal resources. Days after the shooting, the U.S. Marshals' Two Rivers Violent Fugitive Task Force located and arrested Wright, bringing her back to Memphis to face charges. At trial in April of 2026, Wright's defense attempted to establish a claim of self-defense, arguing that Dr. Nelson had been the aggressor during the confrontation. Prosecutors countered with surveillance footage from the shopping plaza, telling jurors the recording showed no evidence that Wright's actions reflected fear for her own safety. Footage, the state argued instead, showed a level of calculation inconsistent with a defensive response. The jury rejected the self-defense argument and convicted Wright of second-degree murder. At her sentencing hearing on June 15, 2026, the presiding judge spoke directly to the surveillance footage, telling the courtroom that it revealed a profound lack of empathy in the moments after the shooting. Dr. Nelson left in that parking lot alone. Wright was sentenced to 25 years in state prison, with the court specifying zero eligibility for early release. For the Whitehaven community, the loss went far beyond one family's grief. Dr. Nelson's work had touched entire neighborhoods, and her absence left a void in advocacy efforts that had taken her a lifetime to build. Her case is a sobering reminder of how a dispute over what might seem on paper like a small amount of money can escalate into an irreversible tragedy. and how community leaders often carry risks that go unseen until it's far too late. Organizations like the National Council on Crime and Delinquency continue to study exactly these patterns of escalation, working to help communities intervene before conflict turns fatal. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 5. Latocia Daniels, April 4, 2019, Shelby County, Tennessee Drive. Latocia Daniels had built a career around helping other people manage conflict and crisis. A licensed clinical social worker, a certified anger management specialist, and a behavioral health consultant at a university in Little Rock, Arkansas, she had spent years counseling others through their darkest moments. Nothing in her professional life suggested she would one day become the center of her own devastating case. For roughly 2 years, Daniels was involved in a secret relationship with 36-year-old Broads Perry, the executive pastor at Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church in Memphis. Both were married to other people at the time. On April 4, 2019, Perry sent Daniels a message ending the relationship, telling her he had chosen to stay in his marriage. What happened next unfolded with alarming speed. Investigators found that within a short window after receiving that message, Daniels drove to a gun shop in Sherwood, Arkansas, legally purchased a handgun, and then drove more than 2 hours across state lines to the Memphis apartment where Perry lived with his wife, Tabitha. Because the couple had known Daniels from years earlier, she was let into the home. As Tabitha Perry walked Daniels back toward the door following a tense conversation, the confrontation turned catastrophic. Daniels fired the weapon at Pastor Perry, and when Tabitha rushed to his side, Daniels fired at her as well. Perry did not survive his injuries at the hospital. Tabitha survived a wound to her shoulder. When officers arrived at the scene, Daniels was in visible crisis and had to be restrained from harming herself before being taken into custody. The case moved slowly through the courts as Daniels's mental state and legal defense were extensively reviewed over several years. At trial in November of 2025, her defense argued she had been experiencing a severe, uncharacteristic psychological breakdown in the moments surrounding the confrontation. The jury ultimately convicted her of second-degree murder rather than first-degree murder, concluding that while her actions were intentional, prosecutors had not proven the higher standard of premeditation. At her sentencing in February of 2026, the judge acknowledged Daniels's previously spotless record and visible remorse, but was direct in stating that emotional devastation, however real, does not justify taking a life. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison. This case sits at a difficult intersection. A trained mental health professional who, by her own defense's account, was overwhelmed by a crisis she had spent her career helping others manage. It's a sobering illustration of how quickly emotional crisis can escalate into irreversible tragedy, and why access to mental health crisis support matters for everyone, regardless of professional background. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline remains available around the clock for anyone in the grip of a mental health emergency, offering free and confidential support before a crisis reaches a point of no return. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 6. Karen Guevara, 2020 through 2021. Shelby County, Tennessee. Not every case on this channel involves a life lost. Some involve something else entirely, a systematic betrayal of public trust during one of the most vulnerable moments in recent American history. This is the case of Karen Guevara. When the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the country in 2020, the federal government moved quickly to create emergency financial relief programs under the CARES Act, designed to catch millions of Americans who had suddenly lost their jobs and their income. For most people, that safety net was a lifeline. For Karen Guevara and 2 Memphis-based co-conspirators, Deashley Tabor and Rochelle Turner, it became an opportunity for exploitation. Investigators found that Guevara's network built an operation around stolen personal information, social security numbers and employment histories gathered from individuals across the country, which they used to file hundreds of fraudulent unemployment insurance claims. Because state agencies were overwhelmed with the sheer volume of legitimate applications during the crisis, many of these fraudulent claims slipped through undetected. In total, the network is believed to have drained more than $560,000 in emergency relief funds across more than 20 states. Guevara didn't stop at the federal level. She also fabricated employment termination letters and false wage documents to fraudulently claim funds through Tennessee's own emergency cash assistance program, extracting an additional $20,000 directly from the state. The scheme eventually unraveled after a forensic digital audit led by the Department of Labor's Office of Inspector General traced the IP addresses behind the fraudulent applications and followed the money directly back to accounts controlled by Guevara and her co-conspirators. She was indicted on federal charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and making false claims against the United States government. At her sentencing on February 13, 2026, Chief United States District Judge Cheryl H. Littman handed down a sentence of 1 year and 1 day in federal custody, followed by 3 years of supervised release, along with an order of financial restitution. Her primary co-conspirator, Deashley Tabor, received a heavier sentence given a larger role in orchestrating the scheme. Guevara's case is a quieter kind of crime story. No violence, no headlines about a life lost. But its impact was very real, touching hundreds of vulnerable people and draining public funds meant to catch families at their lowest point. It stands as a reminder that some of the most damaging crimes leave no visible wound at all, only a financial one shared by an entire community. If you ever suspect you've been the target of identity theft or benefits fraud, the Federal Trade Commission's identity-theft.gov offers free guidance on how to report it and begin reclaiming your information. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 7. Nura Jackson, June 4, 2005, Shelby County, Tennessee. Few cases in Tennessee's legal history have raised as many uncomfortable questions about the justice system itself as the case of Nura Jackson, a case that began as a devastating loss inside one Memphis home and ended nearly a decade later as a landmark ruling on prosecutorial misconduct. In June of 2005, 18-year-old Nura Jackson was living in an affluent Memphis neighborhood with her mother, 39-year-old Jennifer Jackson, a successful bond trader. By every outward measure, Nura was living the fast-paced life of a typical 18-year-old. Parties, friends, the last stretch of adolescence before adulthood. Behind that ordinary teenage exterior, though, tension had been building at home, largely over Jennifer's frustration with her daughter's lifestyle and the two women's disagreements about the family's finances. In the early morning hours of June 4, 2005, emergency dispatchers received a frantic call from Nura. She told police she had just returned home from a night out to find her mother inside her bedroom, unresponsive. When Memphis police arrived, they discovered a scene of extraordinary violence. Jennifer Jackson had suffered extensive injuries in what investigators would describe as one of the most disturbing crime scenes they had encountered, with no signs that anyone had forced their way into the home. Suspicion turned toward Nura almost immediately. Investigators built a case around a financial motive, pointing to ongoing arguments between mother and daughter over Nura's spending and lifestyle, as well as the family's estate, valued at as much as $1.5 million. Prosecutors also highlighted that Nura had been seen at a nearby convenience store shortly after her mother's estimated time of death, purchasing bandages for a fresh cut on her hand, a wound she said had come from opening a package days earlier. At her trial in 2009, prosecutors presented Nura to the jury as a cold, unremorseful teenager motivated by a desire for financial independence. It worked. The jury convicted her of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to 20 years and 9 months in prison. For most cases, that would be the end of the story. For Nura Jackson, it was only the beginning of a second, entirely different legal battle, this one against the prosecution itself. In August of 2014, the Tennessee Supreme Court took the extraordinary step of completely overturning her conviction. In its ruling, the court issued a scathing rebuke of the lead prosecutor, finding what it called a flagrant violation of Nura's constitutional rights. The court found that prosecutors had withheld a critical piece of evidence from the defense, a handwritten statement from a key witness that directly contradicted what that same witness told the jury under oath. The court also found that the prosecutor had improperly commented during closing arguments on Noura's decision not to testify in her own defense, a right guaranteed under the United States Constitution that prosecutors are never permitted to hold against a defendant. Facing the prospect of a full retrial after nearly a decade already spent behind bars, Noura made a difficult legal decision in 2015. She entered what's known as an Alford plea to the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter, a plea in which a defendant maintains their innocence while acknowledging that prosecutors likely have enough evidence to secure a conviction if the case went to trial again. Given credit for time already served, Noura Jackson walked out of the Mark H. Luttrell Correctional Center in Memphis on August 7, 2016, a free woman, though the truth of what happened inside that Memphis home in the early hours of June 4, 2005, remains to this day a matter of public dispute. What makes this case so significant isn't just what happened to Jennifer Jackson, though her family's loss remains real and unresolved regardless of the legal outcome. It's what the case revealed about the fragility of the justice system itself, and how a single instance of withheld evidence and prosecutorial overreach can unravel a conviction nearly a decade after the fact. Cases like this one are part of why organizations such as the Innocence Project continue pushing for stronger safeguards around evidence disclosure, because a fair trial depends entirely on both sides playing by the same rules, and when they don't, everyone loses, including the memory of the victim at the center of it all. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 8. Vanessa Coleman, January 6th and 7th, 2007, Knox County, Tennessee. Some cases on this channel involve a single, isolated act. This one involves something far more disturbing, a multi-day ordeal that would come to be remembered as one of the most horrifying crimes in the history of Knoxville, Tennessee, and a defendant whose role in it would spark years of legal debate over the line between participation and complicity. In January of 2007, 23-year-old Shannon Christian and her boyfriend, 23-year-old Christopher Newsom, were on a date when they were confronted at gunpoint outside a Knoxville apartment complex. The young couple was forced into their own vehicle and driven to a rental house on Chipman Street, occupied by a man named Lamarcus Davidson. Vanessa Coleman, who was visiting Knoxville with her boyfriend, Latalvis Cobbins, was inside that house throughout the ordeal that followed over the next 2 days. Christopher Newsom was taken from the home and did not survive what happened to him near a set of nearby railroad tracks. Shannon Christian was held inside a bedroom of the house, where investigators would later document evidence of prolonged severe abuse before she too did not survive. When investigators finally located the scene days later, they recovered a personal journal belonging to Coleman. In its pages, she described her time in Knoxville as something close to an adventure, entries that made no mention whatsoever of the suffering taking place feet away from where she was staying. That journal would become one of the most chilling pieces of evidence presented at trial. At her 2010 trial, Coleman's defense argued that she was herself a victim, under the coercive control of the male defendants in the house and too afraid to intervene or leave. It was an argument that resonated, at least partially, with the jury. Coleman was acquitted of the direct murder charges, but convicted on 17 separate counts, including facilitation of first-degree murder, kidnapping and rape, convictions reflecting a jury's conclusion that while she may not have delivered the fatal violence herself, her presence and inaction inside that house made her legally responsible for what unfolded there. The case then took an almost unbelievable turn. It was discovered that the judge who presided over the original trials, Richard Baumgartner, had been struggling with a severe prescription drug addiction throughout the proceedings and had been obtaining those drugs from individuals on probation under his own court's supervision. The revelation forced the retrial of every defendant in the case. At Coleman's second trial in 2013, she was resentenced to a consolidated 35-year term, while the case's primary architect, Lamarcus Davidson, remains on death row and the other male defendants are serving sentences of life without parole. Vanessa Coleman became eligible over time to petition for parole. At an emotional virtual hearing on December 8, 2020, the Tennessee Board of Parole heard directly from Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom's parents, who described a loss that has never stopped shaping their lives. The board voted unanimously to deny Coleman's release, scheduling her next review for 2030. This case remains one of the most studied in Tennessee legal history. not only for the horror of what happened to two young people on an ordinary date night, but for what it revealed about the fragility of the justice system when the person entrusted to oversee it was compromised from within. Advocacy groups such as the National Organization for Victim Assistance continue working directly with families like the Christians and the Newsomes, offering support through exactly this kind of prolonged, multi-decade fight for accountability. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 9. Natasha Cornett, April 6, 1997, Greene County, Tennessee. Some cases on this channel involve a single act of desperation. This one involves something far more calculated, a random act of violence against a family who did nothing more than stop to offer kindness to strangers on the side of the highway. Natasha Cornett grew up in rural poverty in eastern Kentucky, and by her late teenage years, she had drifted far from the structure and support systems most young people rely on. She immersed herself in a dark alternative subculture, publicly identified as a devil worshipper, and became the central figure around whom a small group of disaffected, vulnerable teenagers orbited, young people ranging in age from 14 to 20, many of them, like Cornett, dealing with their own unstable home lives. In early April of 1997, 18-year-old Cornett and 5 companions packed into a failing vehicle for what they intended as a cross-country trip toward New Orleans. On April 6, 1997, that car broke down at an interstate rest stop in Greene County, Tennessee. At the same rest stop, a family was passing through on their way home from a religious gathering. 34-year-old Vidar Lilylid, his 28-year-old wife Delphina, and their 2 young children, 6-year-old Tabitha and 2-year-old Peter. Vidar, a devoted member of his faith, approached the group of teenagers simply to share his beliefs with them, an act of warmth that would have devastating consequences. Desperate for a working vehicle to continue their journey, the group turned on the family. At gunpoint, the Lilylids were forced into their own van and driven to a remote gravel road in Bayleton, Tennessee. What happened next devastated an entire community and drew national attention. Vidar and Delphina Lilylid did not survive the encounter. Both of their young children were also shot. Tabitha did not survive her injuries, passing away the following day in a local hospital. Remarkably, 2-year-old Peter survived, though he was left permanently disabled, having lost sight in one eye, living proof of both the horror of that night and the sheer resilience it takes to survive it. The group fled in the family's stolen van, triggering an international manhunt that ended just 2 days later, when U.S. Customs and immigration officers intercepted them attempting to cross into Mexico. And to avoid the possibility of the death penalty, Cornett and all 5 of her co-defendants entered guilty pleas in February of 1998, admitting to first-degree murder, attempted murder, and especially aggravated kidnapping. Investigators noted that forensic evidence suggested Cornett had not personally fired the fatal shots, but prosecutors and the court determined that her role as the group's ideological leader made her every bit as legally culpable as those who had. In March of 1998, all 6 defendants were sentenced to 3 consecutive terms of life without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 25 years. Cornett has since made repeated appeals arguing ineffective legal counsel. All have been denied. More than a quarter-century later, the Lilylid case remains one of the starkest reminders in Tennessee history of how quickly an act of pure kindness, a father simply wanting to talk to a group of struggling teenagers, can be met with unimaginable violence. Peter Lilylid, the toddler who survived that night, has since grown into adulthood, carrying both the physical and emotional weight of what he lived through, and his story continues to be a touchstone for advocacy around victims' rights for children who survive violent crime. Organizations such as the National Center for Victims of Crime provide ongoing resources specifically for families rebuilding life after this kind of senseless, random violence. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 10. Lindsay Lowe, September 12, 2011, Sumner County, Tennessee. Our final case is, in many ways, the most quietly devastating one in this collection. A story not of calculated violence, but of a hidden crisis that unraveled inside a home that from the outside looked entirely ordinary. In September of 2011, 25-year-old Lindsay Lowe was a college graduate living with her deeply religious parents in Hendersonville, Tennessee. To her community, her church, and her longtime fiancé, her life appeared stable and unremarkable. What no one around her knew was that Lowe was in the final stage of a pregnancy she had concealed from everyone in her life. A pregnancy that paternity testing later confirmed resulted from a relationship outside her engagement. On the morning of September 12, 2011, alone in her parents' home, Lowe went into labor and gave birth to twin boys. In a video statement she later gave to investigators, she said the infant survived only a few minutes after birth. Overwhelmed and terrified that their cries would reveal her secret to her family, she took actions that ended both of their lives, before concealing what had happened inside her bedroom. The tragedy went unnoticed for 2 full days. On September 14, 2011, Lowe's father discovered one of the infants while retrieving laundry from her room, a moment of shock that led investigators to the second infant shortly after. At her trial in March of 2013, prosecutors and the defense clashed sharply over Lowe's state of mind. Investigators had found that Lowe searched online for information related to inducing labor in the weeks before the births, which prosecutors argued showed clear premeditation. Her defense countered that Lowe was suffering from a severe documented psychological condition known as pregnancy denial, arguing she was entirely dissociated from reality in the moments after giving birth. The jury sided with the prosecution, convicting her on multiple counts including premeditated first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse. She was sentenced to concurrent life terms, with parole eligibility not arriving until age 77. For nearly a decade, that appeared to be the final chapter. Then, in October of 2022, a Sumner County post-conviction judge vacated her conviction entirely, ruling that a juror from her original trial had shown significant undisclosed bias on a pretrial questionnaire. Lowe was released on bond to live under house arrest with her parents, while the state pursued an appeal. That freedom did not last. In June of 2024, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals reversed the lower court's decision, ruling there was no conclusive evidence that the juror's presence had actually compromised the fairness of the original trial. Lowe's convictions were fully reinstated, her bond was revoked, and she was returned to custody, where she remains today at the Deborah K. Johnson Rehabilitation Center in Nashville, continuing to serve her life sentence. This case sits at the center of one of the most difficult conversations in the true crime space, the intersection of severe, undiagnosed psychological crisis and the law's obligation to hold someone accountable regardless of the mental state behind an act. It's also a case that underscores a broader, often invisible public health issue, the phenomenon of concealed pregnancy and the profound isolation that can surround it. Confidential, judgment-free support for anyone facing an unplanned or concealed pregnancy is available through the National Maternal Mental Health Hotline, a resource built specifically to reach people before a private crisis becomes an irreversible tragedy. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. If you made it all the way through these 10 cases, we'd love for you to leave a comment letting us know which one stuck with you the most. Hit subscribe so you never miss the next investigation, and we'll see you in the next episode of Cold Case Hour. 10 cases, 10 Tennessee counties, 10 women whose names, for very different reasons, became permanently woven into the legal history of this state. As we close out this investigation, it's worth stepping back and asking what, if anything, connects them, because on the surface, these stories could not look more different from one another. Krista Gale Pike was 18 years old and consumed by jealousy inside a program built to save young people from exactly the kind of instability that shaped her. Gail Owens spent decades enduring what she said was a hidden nightmare behind a picture-perfect suburban front door, and made a choice that would cost her 26 years of her life, even after the courts acknowledged how disproportionate her sentence truly was. Mary Winkler's case forced an entire country to sit with the uncomfortable question of what really happens behind the walls of a home that looks, from a church pew, like the model of stability. Tiffany Wright and LaToshia Daniels both remind us how quickly an ordinary human conflict, a $200 disagreement, a broken relationship, can spiral into something that can never be undone. Karen Guevara's case proved that devastation doesn't always require violence at all. Sometimes it just requires access, opportunity, and a crisis large enough for no one to notice what's slipping through the cracks. Neura Jackson and Vanessa Coleman both exposed, in very different ways, how fragile our justice system can be. One undone by a prosecutor who broke the rules meant to protect a fair trial, the other complicated by a judge whose own hidden addiction compromised an entire set of proceedings. Natasha Cornett's case remains one of the starkest reminders in American history that an act of pure kindness, offered to strangers on the side of a highway, can be met with the worst possible response. And Lindsay Lowe's case forces us to confront one of the most isolating, least discussed crises a person can face in complete silence, and what happens when that silence breaks in the worst possible way. What ties all 10 of these cases together isn't geography alone, though every single one of them unfolded within the borders of Tennessee, from the courtrooms of Knox County to the quiet streets of Hendersonville. What ties them together is this: behind every headline, every verdict, and every sentence handed down, there was a person who did not survive, a family left to rebuild without them, and a community forced to reckon with how something like this could happen in their own backyard. These are not just legal case files. They are the permanent, unhealed scars of real Tennessee towns: Knoxville, Memphis, Selma, Baylorton, Hendersonville, places that before these cases were known for nothing more than being quietly ordinary. At Cold Case Hour, our goal has never been to sensationalize what happened to these victims, or to turn their worst days into entertainment stripped of context. Our goal is to document these cases honestly, to hold up the outcomes of our justice system for real scrutiny, and to make sure that names like Colleen Slemmer, Ronald Owens, Matthew Winkler, Dr. Yvonne Nelson, Broads Perry, Jennifer Jackson, Channon Christian, Christopher Newsom, Vidar and Delphina, and Tabitha Lillelid, and 2 infant boys who never had the chance to be named publicly, are not forgotten underneath the names of the women who took their futures from them. If any part of what you heard today resonated with you personally, whether it's the weight of hidden abuse, the isolation of a mental health crisis, or simply needing someone to talk to, please don't carry it alone. The resources we've mentioned throughout this episode, from the National Domestic Violence Hotline to the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, exist around the clock, free and confidential, because getting ahead of a crisis is always better than investigating one after the fact. Thank you for spending this time with us and trusting Cold Case Hour to bring you these stories with the seriousness and respect they deserve. If you made it this far, we'd genuinely love to know which of these 10 cases affected you the most, and why. Drop it in the comments below. We read every single one. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next investigation. We'll see you in the next episode of Cold Case Hour.